Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Cyrus Webb Presents. And for our radio audience tuning in at Conversations Live, you guys can be with us as well. I'm Cyrus Webb. Glad you all could join us for what's going to be an amazing conversation. I'm excited to welcome back best-selling author Victoria Christopher Murray. Since the last time she was on with us, she's a New York Times best-selling author. You guys know her from a variety of books, some of which are here with me today for those who are watching us on camera. But she's gearing up for the release of her next book that you guys see here, called Harlem Rhapsody. It tells the story of Jessie Redmond Fawcett. We're going to talk to Victoria not only about the writing of this book, but also what this means for her career and what she hopes to be able to take away from it. Victoria, thank you again for spending some time with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me back. We've been together for a long time, Cyrus, since the first book.
Let's talk about, I think that's a perfect way to start. 1997. So this year, 28 years, Victoria, that you have been giving readers amazing work. 28 years. How does it feel at this point in your career to be able to not only to reflect on your own history, but then to release your first historical novel solo?
You know, it's so amazing to me because, Cyrus, I always say I remember when I had one book and three fans: my mother, my father, my husband. Even my sisters were suspect at the time, And I remember looking at people who had 4 and 5 books and wondering, oh, what would that feel like? Mm-hmm. And now I have 28 years under my belt. I've tried my best with every single book to get better, to deliver better stories. I feel like I owe the reader that. And if it were to all end today, and it's not, but if it were to all end today, I'd be pleased with what I've done.
Wow. Victoria, I have to tell our audience, I was so excited that we're having this chance to chat. And I want our audience, if you guys have not pre-ordered the book already, if you haven't told a friend about it, please do. Victoria and I were discussing this book last year. And at that point, she was able to show me the cover. I saw the cover at that point. I hadn't read anything. So Victoria was gracious enough to be able to make sure I got an advance copy of the book. And Victoria, I have to say, in all honesty, nobody else could have written this book.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
And let me tell you why I say that. When I think about, I had never even heard of Jessie Redmond Fawcett, for one thing. I wouldn't have known about her if it was not for you. And we'll get into how she came to you. But the fact that there are so many similarities in your story.
Yes.
I thought that was, when I was reading it, this could be your story in many ways. And I thought about that. So I want to start with that point when it comes to the book. How did you find out about this hidden figure?
I think, that is such a good point, Cyrus. I didn't know if anybody was going to pick up on that. Mm-hmm. But when I decided I was going to write a solo historical fiction, mm-hmm. I knew that who I chose was going to be very important because people would be watching me after the success of the Personal Librarian First Ladies. Mm-hmm. And I knew I would be spending like 2 years with this person. So I wanted it to be somebody I could relate to. Mm-hmm. And my agent said, why don't you choose a period of time, a place that you want to spend the next 2 years with? And I'm from New York, so I was thinking New York. I was thinking 1920s, that would be fun. And then I was like, the Harlem Renaissance. I'm a writer. Wouldn't it be great to focus on the women of the Harlem Renaissance? But when I started to dig into it, it was all male names. It was all Langston Hughes, County Cullen, W.E.B. Du Bois, James Weldon Johnson. Zora gets slipped in there sometimes. Gwendolyn Bennett gets slipped in there. There were no women. But I kept digging. I learned how to research and digging. And I read something that Langston Hughes said. And in one of his books, he said, Jessie Redmond Fawcett was the midwife of the Harlem Renaissance. And I was like, wow, midwife. I've never heard her name, midwife. That means she gave birth. What does that mean? Yeah. I started looking her up, and there's not a lot of information on her. More now, but there is not a lot of information on her. In fact, she's a member of Delta Sigma Theta, and I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta. And even when I looked it up on Just in Delta, she wasn't even listed there. She is now. And I went to some historians in my sorority and found that out. So I found her her by digging into history, unfolding all of those places where people are hidden. And I found this woman who I had so much in common with because she wrote the very first novel of the Black middle class. And I've been writing novels about the Black middle class since I started 28 years ago, and I had never heard her name.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's so many things, and I'm going to talk around some of it, Victoria. You'll get it because, of course, you wrote it. For those, of course, who've had the privilege of being able to to read advanced copies of it, you guys will get it. But for those of you who have not pre-ordered it, you guys, what I think you all will take from this conversation, this is my hope, and I went into it with Victoria today with the idea of not only, of course, talking about this point in her career, Victoria's career, but also why this story is so necessary for now. Because I think as we're kind of being able to know, and there will be, as you have already talked about, Victoria, people who will focus on, some of the love story, aspect of it. But there's so much more. And I want to begin with another similarity. And I think your fans will really get this. And that is when you talk about Jean Toomer and the conversation there that you wrote with Jesse. Because when I was reading that could have been a 2025 conversation, Victoria, as you know, about not wanting to be defined by what you look like and not want to be put in a box. Talk to us about, because you were able to use your creative freedom as you're telling this story, what was it like for you to envision for Jesse in that time, having to deal with things like that, but also your own career and having to go through the same thing?
Yeah, one of the things I loved about writing about this book was bringing to life all of the other writers of the Harlem Renaissance, all the writers she discovered, including County Cullen, Langston Hughes. So I was able to breathe life into them. And one that we don't know as much about, Jean Toomer. And while she discovered them, she mentored them and helped them through all kinds of situations. And Jean's, what he was struggling with, it's like you said, something that could be here right in the year 2025. As a writer, he didn't want to be defined as a Black writer. He did not want to be defined that way because he felt it would be limiting. It would limit his market. And he felt that he was Black and white anyway. He was biracial. That's not a term they used at the time. But he had Black in him, white in him. He said, I didn't write this book with my 5 Black fingers, or I didn't use my white half side of my brain. So why do I have to be a Black writer? And it was an interesting conversation because he says something in the book, and it's not going to give away or destroy the story, but it was probably some of the most profound words I've ever written, where he says that why do we adhere to that 1 drop rule when it was put together by white supremacists? And he says, why would he ever allow white men who hate him define him? And that's a conversation that we can have, like you said, today in this political climate. We're going down the road of white supremacy again. And how are we going to allow this to happen? And how are we going to allow people to define us?
When I got to that part of the book, and that's why I said no one else could have written this book. Because I can see you in your 28-year career having to have those kind of conversations, Victoria. Another one that, and again, I have to admit too, for our audience, if you're saying, Jean Toomer, I'm gonna be honest, I never heard of Jean Toomer.
I never heard of her.
Never heard of Claude McKay either, and that was another interesting one. So let me tell you why I'm bringing that up, because of, again, thinking about what we're able to find out about Jesse in the book, but also thinking about you. Everything kept reminding me of you, Victoria. So I'm thinking about Jesse sitting there with Claude McKay, someone who's accomplished, who, they know they're who they are. They know what they've done. So why do I need you? And then Jesse being able to also be able to admit, I'm good at what I do too. You are someone who has had such tremendous success in your career, Victoria. And what's so beautiful about you is that you mentioned the personal librarian. so many people were just discovering you
Yeah.
with this.
Yeah.
How does that feel as you think about, again, conversations like you wrote with Jesse and Claude, to think about your being able to bring those 28 years to people who are just discovering who Victoria Christopher Murray is?
Well, one of the things I love about my 28 years writing career is
Hmm.
that I think you would agree with this, Cyrus, because you've probably read as many of my books as anybody else. I
Yeah.
don't really, except for historical fiction,
Hmm.
I haven't really stayed in a genre.
Yeah.
When I first came out, I wrote what people call Christian fiction. I
Yeah.
didn't write temptation with that in my mind. I didn't write Christian fiction in my mind. And
Right.
then I got the title of like the Queen of Fiction, Christian fiction, and starting it.
Hmm.
And then when I veered off a little bit to like grown folks business and other kinds of stories, some of the Christians were like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm just writing the stories in my heart." And then
Right.
I wrote Stand Your Ground, and people were
Hmm.
like, "Well, this is a thriller or what?" And I was like, "I'm just writing what's in my heart." So one of the things that I'm able to do when I talk to other writers is to, over the 28 years, I've written just about everything. I don't write horror or sci-fi, but
Right.
I've written the book that was in my heart at the time.
Hmm.
And I've been able to write across genres, not even adhering to any genre. This is the first time. So as people are discovering me and going back, they're like, "Oh, she wrote that too.
Hmm.
She wrote that too." I too, Cyrus, had never heard of Jessie. And as a woman, as a Black woman writer, she should have been the first name I knew. As a member of Delta Sigma Theta, she should have been the first name I knew.
Yeah.
As a Black woman who always looked for mentors and people to look up to, she was the first Black female to graduate from Cornell University. The first Black woman, she thought, who got a Phi Beta Kappa. All of those things. There are so many ways that we should have heard her name. And the thing I'm most honored about now in writing historical fiction is that I get to uncover these
Yeah.
very important people,
Hmm.
very, very important people, and uncover them all for all of us.
For sure. And we're so glad about that. I want to say, for those who are just tuning in, welcome. You're watching Cyrus Webb Presents or listening to Conversations Live for a radio audience, either at Max WYED 94.1 FM, WYEDonline.com, as well as through our friends at iHeartRadio. We're excited to welcome back New York Times bestselling author Victoria Christopher Murray. We've been talking about her career, but also her brand new book out this year. You guys see it here, Harlem Rhapsody, featuring Jessie Redmond Fawcett, someone that a lot of us are just discovering. And now, because of Victoria's new book, you guys can be able to get to know her and share that with others. Is that also part of the fun of this as well, Victoria, that you're able to discover and unearth these individuals, but also help us to do the same things because you wrote about them?
Yes, because one of my best friends said to me with the personal librarian, she said, "Who knew?"
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think that's what's going to happen with Harlem Rhapsody. I think
Yeah.
people are going to look at the woman who started the Harlem Renaissance. Like there
Yeah.
would be no Harlem Renaissance without Jessie Redmond Fawcett. And
Yeah.
all of us who love to read, all of us who love to write, all of us who love history are going to say, "Who knew?" I had
Right.
a white professor say to me when I was speaking at a college recently, she studied the Harlem Renaissance and had never heard of Jessie Redmond Fawcett. And she read the advanced copy of Harlem Rhapsody, and she said she spent weeks going down the rabbit hole,
Mm.
uncovering all. Jessie wrote more books and articles and everything than anyone else during the Harlem Renaissance. Nobody knows her name.
Right.
Crazy, right?
Yeah, and one of the names that people do know, and we'll get to this part of the conversation. I wanted to make sure I set the stage for everything
Yes,
else, because as you mentioned, a lot of
yes.
people will focus just on the Du Bois
On the part we're
part of it.
about to talk about, when
Right,
the book is
right.
when the book
Yeah,
is,
go ahead.
but the part we're about to talk about is so important
Yeah,
because I believe the Harlem Renaissance would have never started without this.
Got you. So a lot of the we've been talking about, a lot of us, myself included, didn't know about Jesse. We have heard the name W.E.B. Du Bois before, and I think regardless of where you are, you know the name if you don't know what they've done. What was that like for you to discover some of the intricacies, not only of his work, but the work he did because of Jesse? Because I love the way that you wrote that when you were able to bring basically Langston Hughes to Du Bois, thanks to Jesse, and says, okay, this is someone we have to have.
Yes, and that part, everything I try to write in a book is anchored in history. But of course, I
Yes,
don't know what they said and everything.
sure,
But
sure.
she was the one who had she had published Langston in the Brownies book, the other magazine.
Mhm.
But when he wrote The Negro Speaks of Rivers, and she read that, I know for a fact she took it to Du Bois and said to him, read this. There's a Negro out there who writes like this and no one knows his name. And so I knew that. So it was so much fun to really dig into W.E.B. Du Bois as well. There were
Mhm.
things that I didn't know about him, and I came to understand him a little bit more. We know about the talented 10th, but do we really know what that meant? I used to think it was just him saying that there was this group of people who were better than others. I didn't know what he felt that 10% should do for the entire race.
Mhm.
Um, I didn't know. I read The Souls of Black Folk when I was very young, like in my early teens, late teens. And then reading it again as a woman, I got so much more out of it. And
Wow.
the first time I read words, this time I felt his pain. I felt his pain reading that book of being a Black man in this country. And then I felt his pain from losing his son.
Mhm.
And then deciding, he made a conscious decision that I'm not going to think about my son's death at 2 years old as being something I lost. He said he began to look at it as setting his son free, because what could a Black man do in America anyway? I mean, it was
Wow.
just so profound. He was such a deep man. He brought so much to us, but he was a flawed man. And I had to come to grips with the flaw that he had, with the flaws that Jesse had, and realize that our heroes in history were not perfect.
Yeah. Was that for you, as someone who's a lover of words and of stories? Was that was that difficult for you to grapple with?
That was, I thought about how much of this story, and we don't need to talk around it. How much of the story could I write without talking about their affair?
Hmm.
I thought about that.
Right.
And I thought that if I had written it and not addressed their affair at all, there would have been a plot hole, because
Hmm.
people would have been saying, why is she there? How did she get there? There was never a literary editor of the Crisis magazine before Jesse, and there was never a literary editor of the Crisis magazine after Jesse.
Hmm.
That alone should tell you something.
Right.
And how would I have explained that in
Yeah.
the story?
Yeah.
How would I have explained her coming to New York? How would I have explained all the opportunities she was given? How would I have explained her running the Brownies books and the Crisis just
Mhm.
out of the goodness of her heart? How
Yeah.
would I have explained history
Yeah.
recording that they were always together? How would I have explained David Levering Lewis, who wrote the Pulitzer Prize winning biography on W.E.B. Du Bois? How would I have explained him calling them star-crossed lovers
Yeah.
and having a parallel marriage? And in fact, Mr. Lewis called out another writer once for not including the affair,
Wow.
because in Jesse's story, because he
Mm.
said that was such an important part, and he called the woman out by name.
Wow. Well, even in I didn't mention this earlier, but even in the conversation that I was referencing earlier with Clyde, Claude kind of gives her, as you wrote it, that knowing look and
Yeah.
seeing the way. And let me tell you what was really funny for me as a side note. And this is why I tell people I read books ahead of time because it's like it makes conversations like this so much more
Yes.
powerful. But every time she called him Will, I kept thinking, oh my goodness, this what I'm saying, this is not just a boss. This is a relationship.
Yeah.
But with that relationship, I do want to end with this, Victoria. And again, I appreciate this time, but it also brings it down to something modern day, and that is the choice. And this is something that men and women grapple with: the question of, can you have it all? Jessie talks about herself, in the book about this other individual, this woman who made a choice,
Yeah.
for herself professionally,
Yes.
but how do you? She ends up, not to talk too much into it, Jessie has to also make those choices. What was
Yeah.
that like for you, again, being who you are and thinking about the sacrifices you've made in your 28 years and what you've given and all that you are in this world? What was that like for you to grapple with?
That's an interesting question, Cyrus. And you've made me think of something that I never thought of when writing this book, or I hadn't thought about it until really this moment, till you asked that question. She does grapple with, can she have it all? And what is her greatest love? And her greatest love was literature and books and French and languages. And that was her greatest love. And so, I often say, a lot of people know my husband passed away very early in my writing career. When I met you, I was married, and he had passed away after that. And I often tell my friends that I wouldn't have the career I have today if my husband was alive.
Yeah.
Because I would not have been able to go on the road. I would not have been able to just focus on my career. In fact, in the early years, that was what I was using to grapple with my grief. Was my pouring myself into my career, and I was able to build on it. And I've never thought about it that way before until you just asked that question, because I made a choice.
Yeah.
After my husband passed away, I made a choice, and Jessie's made some choices, and she ended up leaving an amazing legacy because of the choices she made, and hopefully I'll do the same.
Yeah. And so I have to ask you this question. And this is not a gotcha question, but it is, again, as someone who's known you, having read this book. You just talked about legacy. Have you been able to start thinking about your own?
I've had a couple of things happen that make me kind of think about it a little bit. One was that Hampton asked me to send them my manuscripts, when that time comes, and that's going to be kind of cool. Manuscripts, not letters. I'm not sending no letters like everybody else out there have their letters out there. Oh, no, I want everything burned. I want everything. And so I've always thought about legacy in terms of writing the best book I can. I get very annoyed, is a soft word, with people who are writing 30 books a year, and there's no way you can be putting out quality work that way. And I've always thought about my legacy in terms of, what will people read in 50 years? What will they see of me? But I am starting to think now, with 28 years and as many books, that I've been blessed. I grew up to be exactly what I wanted to be as a little girl. Grew up to do this, and I've never taken this blessing of being a full-time writer for granted. I've always poured myself into every book. So whether a person likes it or not, they didn't like it because of lack of effort or trying my best.
Right. Victoria, I was looking forward to this conversation with you. I know we're going to be speaking again once the book officially comes out. But for our audience, if you guys have not pre-ordered your copy of Harlem Rhapsody, now is your chance. For those who are joining us on Cyrus Webb Presents, you'll find the link to Amazon to be able to make sure you pre-order for yourself. Also, Victoria's website is there as well. For those joining us on the radio side and the podcast, you guys will find the link there on our Facebook page. For the podcast audience, you'll find the link there as well. Again, the story of Jessie Redmond Fawcett, a story that you will not forget. And for those who have followed Victoria, I think it will help you better appreciate, especially looking at her as a writer and editor, and impact. I was like, this is crazy. And again, I went into this, Victoria, not knowing, again, anything,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so forgetting that it was, even though you have the years 1920, and like, this could be Victoria's story. So definitely congratulations to you. I mentioned the website, but how else can our audience stay connected with you, Victoria?
Yes, on social media, I'm Victoria Christopher Murray everywhere. On Facebook, on Instagram are the two that I spend the most time on, and on Blue Sky. I'm Victoria Christopher Murray everywhere.
Love it. Victoria, congratulations again. Looking forward to our next chat together.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cyrus.
More than welcome. And we thank your audience for tuning in to another great segment of Cyrus Webb Presents and Conversations Live. Until next time, you all make it a great one. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.